Okay, so you know how you guys are always sending us these thought-provoking articles and excerpts about debt and money and freedom and all that?
Yeah, we've gotten a ton of really interesting stuff lately. From ancient wisdom, like the Bible.
Exactly, the
to-
Bible. And then we've also got those modern money gurus, like Your Money or Your
A
Life.
barefoot investor.
Oh, and of course, financial freedom.
So many good ones.
So we figured it's time for a deep dive. We want to really pull out those golden nuggets of wisdom
Mm-hmm.
about how to not just avoid debt, but like truly build a life where money isn't this constant weight holding you back.
Absolutely. Like, what does it really take to achieve that financial independence everyone's always talking about?
Right. And here's the fascinating thing. Whether it's these ancient texts or modern advice, they all seem to agree on one fundamental thing:
What's that?
debt and true freedom. They just don't mix.
It's true. It's like this underlying theme that runs through all of them, even though they come from such different places and times.
Okay, so let's start with that ancient wisdom, right?
Yeah.
You can't talk about debt historically without going right to the Bible,
Yeah.
specifically Proverbs 22.7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. It's a pretty bold statement, right?
It is. And it comes from a time when, you know, economic systems were vastly different from what we have today.
Right?
But it highlights this core human experience. When you owe someone, you lose a bit of control. And that vulnerability is something that these modern financial guides, in their own way, they're trying to help us understand and avoid.
So when it says slave, it's not just like, oh man, my budget's tight this month until I get paid. It's a bigger, deeper thing.
It's a limitation on your choices. It's saying that when you're in debt, some part of your resources, your energy, even your ability to make decisions, they're not fully yours.
They belong to the lender.
Right.
Uh,
You're obligated to them. So instead of pursuing your own goals, you're constantly focused on meeting that debt obligation first.
So it's like you're always looking over your shoulder financially, and that must be so limiting in ways we might not even realize.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that the Bible doesn't just point at the problem, it also nudges us toward a solution, which is, careful financial planning and, really importantly, living within your means.
It's about avoiding that indebted situation from the get-go,
Exactly.
which is a perfect bridge to those modern sources we were talking about. I mean, it's amazing how this ancient wisdom still applies today.
Let's talk of your money or your life.
Okay, sure.
What connections do you see there with this ancient wisdom about debt and freedom?
Well, Dominguez and Robin, they offer a really practical, hands-on framework for that whole living within your means idea. Their main point isn't about hitting some magic income number.
Right.
It's about becoming aware of your relationship with money. And a huge part of that is minimizing and eventually eliminating debt completely.
They're big on that whole financial consciousness thing, aren't they? Yes.
Yeah.
Tracking every dollar, understanding what it's doing for you, and making sure it aligns with your values.
Right. What actually matters to you.
Exactly. And when you become aware of your spending, you start to see those things that aren't really serving you.
The things you're spending money on that don't bring you real, lasting value.
Yeah, and that's where you can start to cut back, which ties right back to that biblical idea of avoiding unnecessary debt by not buying a bunch of stuff you don't need.
It's like a direct line from ancient wisdom to practical modern advice.
And then Dominguez and Robin, they give you really concrete steps for tackling that high interest debt, which is often what keeps people stuck in that paycheck to paycheck cycle.
Those high-interest debts can really feel like you're just treading water financially, never getting ahead.
Totally. Now, Scott Pape, the barefoot investor, he's got a very different style. Very straightforward, no nonsense. And he's all about getting out of debt fast.
Yeah, he doesn't mess around.
He's really clear about tackling those high interest debts first. Like, credit card debt is public enemy number one for him.
Oh yeah, he really goes after credit cards.
He uses that fire extinguisher analogy, which I think is so powerful. It's like you need to focus intensely on putting out those financial fires that are costing you the most in interest.
Because those high interest rates, they really do feel like an emergency.
Exactly. And he also talks a lot about building an emergency fund, which is key to avoiding future debt.
Right, because if you have that cushion, you're not as likely to reach for the credit card when something unexpected comes up.
That's the idea. So you're building that financial security and peace of mind, which goes back to those deeper themes we see in Proverbs, about seeking peace and stability in your life.
So it's not just about the numbers in your bank account. It's also about that feeling of security and calm.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about Grant Sabatier, financial freedom.
Mm.
He brings a slightly different perspective to this conversation.
Yeah, he does. What's interesting about Sabatier is that he doesn't just focus on cutting back and paying off debt. He's also really big on increasing your income at the same time.
It's like a two-pronged attack on your finances.
Exactly. He realizes that in today's world, relying on just one income stream can be really risky. If something happens to that one job, you're in trouble. And that makes it way harder to get out of debt and build any kind of financial security.
So he's all about those side hustles, right?
Yeah.
Creating multiple ways to bring in money.
Yes. The goal is to make your financial life more resilient. If one income source takes a hit, you've got others to fall back on, which, reduces that temptation to use credit cards. And it can help you pay off debt and build wealth so much faster.
But you're tackling the debt from one side and building up your income on the other. It's a pretty powerful approach.
It is.
Now, I know some of you listening might be thinking, okay, debt's bad, got it. But what about like mortgages and student loans? Are those okay?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
So let's get into some of those more specific scenarios.
Mm.
First, what does the Bible actually say about borrowing? Is it a complete no-no?
Well, it's not that simple. The Bible doesn't outright forbid borrowing in all situations. There are definitely times when it seems to be, a necessary part of life or business.
Okay.
But there's a definite sense of caution throughout those texts. Like there's that constant reminder about the dangers of getting into too much debt, about how much of a burden it can be, like in Proverbs 22.7.
Right, that whole slave to the lender idea.
Exactly. So the main takeaway seems to be borrow only when you really need to, and make sure you have a solid plan for paying it back.
Don't just borrow willy-nilly.
Right.
So it's not like never borrow, but definitely be smart about it.
Oh.
Okay, so what about those bigger debts that a lot of people have, like mortgages for a house or student loans for education? Do those fall under that same cautionary umbrella?
The key with those, I think, is to look at how they're impacting your overall financial picture. Like, can you still comfortably live within your means with those payments? Are those debts preventing you from saving for the future or building wealth? If you're constantly struggling to make those payments and feeling squeezed financially, then you're getting closer to that slave to the lender territory that Proverbs talks about.
It's about making sure those big debts are manageable and don't become an obstacle to your long-term financial well-being.
Exactly.
So it all comes back to that central idea. Don't let debt control you to the point where it dictates your choices and limits your freedom to pursue what you really want. So the big question everyone's thinking, how do we actually achieve that financial freedom while steering clear of that debt trap?
Well, all of our sources, both ancient and modern, they basically point to the same multi-pronged approach. And it starts with consciously choosing to live below your means.
Then less than you earn.
Exactly.
Ugh.
That way you create that surplus that you can then use to pay off debt and build up savings. You've got to figure out what those unnecessary expenses are, especially the ones that don't really align with your values. That's where you can start cutting back.
So you have more money to put towards those important things.
Right. And absolutely avoid that high interest debt like the plague. It's one of the biggest threats to your financial health.
Because that interest just keeps piling up.
Exactly. And then beyond just cutting back and avoiding debt, you want to be saving consistently and investing that money wisely over time. That's how you build real long-term wealth.
That's the key to growing your money.
And then, like Sabatier suggests, you can explore ways to increase your income, through a side hustle or investments or something that can really speed up your progress towards financial independence.
So it's a combination of being mindful of your spending,
Yeah.
getting rid of debt, saving, investing, and increasing your income.
Yeah, it's about making those smart, intentional choices with your money.
So it's like a proactive approach to your finances instead of just letting things happen to you.
Okay, let's break this down into some key takeaways, something our listeners can really start thinking about today. What would you say is the most important step? I think it all goes back to that foundation of living within your means. It's not about depriving yourself.
Right. It's not about being miserable.
Exactly. It's about making those conscious choices about your spending so that you're always spending less than you're bringing in. That's what prevents you from getting into more debt, and it's how you build a solid foundation for real financial independence.
It all starts there. What else is crucial?
You got to make debt reduction a priority, and specifically those high-interest debts, those are the ones you want to attack first.
Like those credit cards we talked about.
Right. They're just draining your resources, and they can keep you trapped in that endless cycle of payments. So get rid of those first, and you'll free up so much more money to put towards other things.
It's like Pape's fire extinguisher approach. Put out the most damaging fires first.
Exactly. And then think about how you can diversify your income. Having multiple sources of income not only protects you if something happens with one of those sources.
Like if you lose your job, for example.
Exactly. But it also means you can pay off debt faster and build wealth quicker. Maybe it's a side hustle, maybe it's investing, but find ways to bring in money from more than just one place.
So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right. And beyond the practical stuff, there's also the mindset of abundance. It's about shifting your focus from always feeling like you're lacking something and needing to borrow to managing your money effectively and seeing the potential for growth.
It's like a more positive and empowering way to think about your money.
Exactly. And to really manage your money well, you need to actively seek out financial education. There's always more to learn about things like budgeting, investing, and planning.
Yeah, you got to keep learning and growing.
And lastly, make sure you have clear financial goals, whether it's paying off a specific debt, building up your emergency fund, or saving for retirement. Having those goals will keep you focused and motivated.
So you know where you're headed and what you're working towards. Okay, so we've got this framework, but how does this actually play out in real life? Let's imagine someone in their early 30s. They've got student loans, probably some credit card debt, maybe a car loan, and they're feeling that squeeze from rising costs and those monthly payments.
Yeah, that's a pretty common situation these days.
It is.
Yeah.
So how can this person start applying these principles to improve their financial situation?
Well, the first thing is to get a really clear picture of all their debts. Figure out which ones have the highest interest rates.
Which are probably those credit cards.
Most likely. So they'd want to focus on aggressively paying down those high interest balances first. Maybe that means putting any extra money towards those cards while making minimum payments on the others.
Makes sense.
At the same time, they could take a hard look at their spending and find some areas where they can cut back even just a little bit to free up more cash.
Every little bit helps.
Absolutely. And even starting a small emergency fund can make a huge difference because then they won't have to rely on credit cards if something unexpected pops up. Once they've made some progress on those high-interest debts and they've got a bit of an emergency fund, they can shift their focus to those student loans and the car loan. And, even if it's just small amounts at first, they can start learning about investing and putting some money into low-cost investments.
So it's about taking those steps one at a time to build that financial security and move towards freedom.
Right. And the key is consistency. Over time, that consistent effort to reduce debt, build savings, and invest, it will pay off. It will not only get rid of their current debt, but it'll also set them up for real financial freedom down the road.
Where they can make choices based on what they really want, not just what they owe.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the message really comes through loud and clear. Both that ancient wisdom and that modern advice, they all emphasize the importance of avoiding the trap of debt and actively building a life of financial independence.
Couldn't agree more.
And that reminder from Proverbs 22.7, the borrower is the slave of the lender. It's still so relevant today.
Definitely.
It's about taking control of your finances so you can control your present and your future. Financial independence isn't just about being debt-free.
It's much bigger than that.
It's about making smart choices, living intentionally, and really taking charge of your money.
That's it.
So as you think about all of this, ask yourself, what is one small, tangible step you can take right now to increase your financial freedom and reduce your reliance on debt? Leave that thought with you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.